I'm amazed that people are here 2 hours later. Obviously, there's a great interest. We are blessed also with James Hanby, who's going to be our last speaker. I had the pleasure and honor of nominating James to the Historic Review Board of Newcastle County, and during his period of time, Brandywine Hundred really had a very strong voice. James is now a magistrate, a state magistrate, and does a great job of chronicling the history of the various first families, as I like to call them, at Brandywine Hundred. And so now let's welcome up James.
Thank you, Bob. I won't keep you long, but we'll try to tie everybody up together here. First, with Riverview, we talked about Dr. Anderson and her book earlier. There is a group of us that have relatives that are buried at Riverview that are trying to make a difference and trying to get that situation back under better care. And certainly the first step was the cleanup that was held out there the other Saturday. And there was a lot of people who came out that none of us knew about before that had relatives that were buried there. And they've asked Dr. Anderson if she would write another book, and she has graciously consented to. So she stood earlier, and if you know that you have a relative that was buried at Riverview, perhaps you might want to stop her before she leaves today and get her information. If you'd like to tell your ancestor's story, I'm sure she would be happy to hear it. Personally, I live just across the other side here in the old Wilson house on Wilson Road, which was built about 1750, the original part. And myself and my wife and children who were out in the hallway playing, but I think they gave up on us. We enjoy the fact that Talley Park is here, and we can walk through the street farm and take part in the walkway that walks all the way around and come up, and the kids enjoy the playground. So I'm certainly grateful that the county has done what it has done with Talley Park and with the library being here in close proximity. And it's one of the things that Councilman Winder is pushing, the ability to walk and enjoy our resources in Brandywine Hundred without having to get into a car. And so I certainly enjoy that. We spoke about all of the families of Brandywine Hundred, and all of us here at the front table are related in some way or another. And I think you would find that in any of us if you go back more than a couple generations in Brandywine Hundred. Mr. Day, for example, is my fifth cousin 3 times removed.
James, just so people know, wonder what removed meant. Okay, as an attorney, I'll just make a little note. Removed means if you're first cousins with each other, and then that first cousin has a child, that is your first cousin once removed. Simple explanation, because a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, well, most genealogy programs will just spit it out. They don't really care what removed is. They just tell you what it is. But fifth cousin 3 times removed. And so, as I say, most everybody finds that they are related in some way or another. My wife, who hopefully has left, because she'll kill me for saying it, but she never did much on her side of the family, and she has issues with her father and her grandmother on that side of the family, and so she never really delved into it very much. And she always told me when we got married, because she knew that I was very interested in the history. Well, my people are second generation off the boat from Italy, and we don't have any relatives here. But I had heard rumors of a genealogy on her side of the family, her father's side of the family, and so I asked my sister-in-law, who's married to Shelley's brother, I said, can you give me a copy of that? And so she made a copy of that, and I got to digging around in there, and sure enough, on her father's side of the family, she does go back in Brandywine Hundred and in the southern part of Pennsylvania, back to all these families that we're talking about, to the Sharpless and the Piles, and just to show how you go back, you have to go back to the mid-1600s, but we're 10th cousins once removed ourselves. And she doesn't know how to take that, but I say, it's Brandywine Hundred, there's been a whole lot more closer. That's one of the things she knocks. She says, your family tree doesn't branch. And in some cases that's true, it comes full circle. There's been a lot of emails that went back and forth when Bob was trying to organize this, and one of the emails that I had sent dealt with how all the families are interrelated, and my relationship to the Day family comes down through Francis Day's brother, Joseph Day, And he, as it were, also married Talley, who was he married Elizabeth Wood, who had a daughter who married Talley, Amer Talley. And Amer was the son of William Talley and Diana Stilley. So there you see, you get the Stilley family, which goes back to the Vanderveers and the Stedmans, and all the way back to the Kalmar Nickel in 1638. They had a son who married into the Forwood family, Amer Talley Forwood, and my father still lives in the farm that they owned, which is it was purchased at sheriff's sale in 1860, which is crushed between the Brandywine Town Center and the Pennsylvania State Line on State Line Road. And their daughter married Reverend Samuel Hance, and Reverend Samuel Hance, as the story goes, was powerfully converted in Adam Talley's woods during camp meeting in 1819. At that time, what is now Chester Bethel Church was known at that time as Bethel Church, and they would have camp meeting every year. And Samuel Hance was powerfully converted and went on to become a lay preacher. And in 1847, Bethel Church was probably one of the most prosperous churches in Brandywine Hundred as far as Methodist Church in terms of enrollment. And they had a little dispute over choir music, printed choir music as it were. Folks felt that you didn't need notes to know how to sing, that the words were sufficient. And there was some young folks who felt like they wanted to form a choir and have printed choir music. And so this split the church. And so Reverend Hance and the other people who felt the way he did of the older generation went just less than a half mile up the street on Foulk Road and founded Siloam. And for a long time, people from Chester Bethel didn't have any business with people from Siloam. It split families, literally. And I will say that today, we're in the Easter time. They do have joint services. We've been having services for Lent together, and we have a joint Thanksgiving service, and we alternate between Chester Bethel and Siloam. So 150 some years later, we have made some amends and have sort of gotten over the dispute from 1847.
Do you use printed music?
We do use printed music. We even allow pianos and things in church, which from back then was not allowed. But their daughter married into the husband's family. Anna Mary Forward married James Buchanan husbands, and I find it humorous. Today we talk a lot about politics, but in those days you really wore your politics on your sleeve. You felt so strong about a candidate, you named your son. Obviously his father was a staunch Democrat. He was born in 1858, and he named his son James Buchanan husbands. I also find it humorous that in his time of his life, he only had 2 other Democratic presidents that were elected, so I don't know if that was a precursor to what that happened. Mr. Day asked me earlier if I knew Grover Hanby, and it was before my time, or maybe it was Mr. Day asked me, I believe. But Grover lived up at Hanby's Corner. He never married. But
Tell us where Hanby's Corner is.
Hanby's Corner is the corner of Marsh and Namens Road. And Grover was a staunch Republican, but his full name was Grover Cleveland Hanby. He was born in 1884, and Samuel Winfield Hanby, who was a staunch Democrat and was a member of the House of Representatives in 1874, named him for President Cleveland. And so he went by Grover Hanby rather than Grover Cleveland Hanby, but I've been told by Francis West that some of the Republicans in the area who knew that his name was Grover Cleveland liked to needle him about that fact. But Francis said that he was always the first at the polling place to vote every time that the elections came up. They had a son, John Amer husbands, and he married the Pennington family. Into the Pennington family, Lydia Pennington, and the Pennington family was one of the ones that was mentioned before. They owned land up east of Ebright Road, north of Namens Road. And the Pennington family goes back into the 1600s and beyond, but they had a connection to William Penn. All of the Pennington children were half-brothers to William Penn's first wife. And when William Penn got the land here, Pennsylvania and Delaware, he brought over some of his half-brothers and sisters-in-law and gave them property, and so that's how they got here. Another story, the 8 Square School was discussed. This is Barbara McEwen's Neighbors of the Great Valley Turnpike, and this is a drawing, representation of 8 Square School, the original one. The current school that is there at the corner of Ramsey Road is a traditional, what you think about as a one-room schoolhouse. This one burnt down sometime probably about 1900. My great-grandfather went to this one. My grandmother went to the new 8 Square. But as you can see, or maybe you can see, at the top in the center there's a little chimney, and it has this roof that comes down. Well, my great-grandfather, who was never one for shying away from a challenge or trouble, during the wintertime, such as what we have now with snow on the ground, the snow would be on the roof. With some assistance from some of his friends, he would climb up to the top there and make snowballs. And the local farmer in the area would always come in before the teacher and start the fire so that the school would be warm when the kids got there. So grandfather husbands would climb up there and drop snowballs down that chimney into the furnace, or into the fireplace, which, as you may or may not know, will set a shot off like it sounds like a shotgun going off. And so he had some people that were watching. They were supposed to let him know when the teacher was coming so he could get down and not get in trouble. And sure enough, the teacher was coming up the road in her horse and buggy, and they signaled for him to get down. And so he started sliding down the roof, and his pants caught at the edge of the roof. And so when the teacher came up to the door, there hung my great-grandfather. Another story that my grandmother passed on to me was that one time my great-grandfather caught a family of small mice. And he saw this as another great opportunity for a little mischief. So he secreted this family of mice away with him to school one day. And those of you who are familiar with one-room schoolhouses, you had the little desk with a hole in the front for your ink. And so he put the family of mice in there, and the teacher got to teaching, and he reached up, took the inkwell out, and then opened his desk just enough to nurse one of those mice out that hole. Well, you can imagine what that set off in the room of the girls. And, you know, everybody was up on the desk and everything as this mouse was going around, until some of the brave boys dispatched the mouse. At which time, everything would calm down, everybody go back to their lessons, and just as that all happened, my great-grandfather would, of course, introduce the next mouse into the room. And luckily, he was never caught. But my grandmother says that her grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, knew that my great-grandfather had this ink in him to do these sort of things, and so every day when he came home, he would have my great-grandfather go out and get a switch, and he would get a whooping, whether he deserved it or not. My great-grandfather felt like that if he didn't get it today, that he probably had done something he'd missed any other time. So he had done that. So those are just some of the great stories that I know of. One of the last things I want to say is that one of the things that we that do this sort of thing that we always are in search of is obviously documents to prove different things. I have the luxury that I come from a long line of pack rats, which my wife could also attest to, that I have inherited that gene. But it's thanks to those type people that we have the history to be able to talk about it. I have things like, we talked about the Quakers. This is a certificate from the Friends meeting at Concord meeting for the Penningtons. They were going to the Chester meeting. I have marriage licenses from the Justice of the Peace where the Penningtons got married, and so forth and so on. And it goes on, you know, that these are things that you can't replace. Death certificates that you just, you know, deserve to be found. And this is one thing I dug out and I put in here just for today. It's the Republican primary election ballot from September 24th, 1906. And I won't read the whole ballot, but there are several names that I would put out. For senator, and I'm assuming this is for state senator, on the ballot that day was Francis Harvey Day. For representative on the ballot, there was both Jeremiah Harvey and Lewis F. Talley. For recorder of deeds, William Chandler. We didn't talk about Chandler family, but another family that's been here forever. And then for road commissioner, Nelson Talley. So you can see that even in 1906, those names were there. I say that because many of us have grandparents or parents that are up there in years, and too often what happens is people don't like to deal with death. We don't do well with death, and people die, and the instinct is there's whole companies that do this and how they come in and take care of the house for you. You don't want to be mess with it, and we lose our history that way. And so I implore you to speak with your older members of your family and make arrangements that if you don't want the stuff, to get it to the Historical Society of Claymont, the Historical Society of Delaware. You know, they're just really interesting things, at least the people like I find interesting. I have, because of the way that my grandmother was, the actual bill from Delaware Hospital from when my father was born in 1946. And if we want to talk about health care, the entire bill was $72 for the hospital. And he was breech. So there was quite an extensive lot of work. And in addition to the hospital bill, she paid Dr. Kerrigan, who was her doctor at the time. Some of you may remember Dr. Kerrigan, $50 for the entire services, for his services. So some of the things that have come down at one point are unrelated, but now are related. This is just a little snippet, which is a receipt. Received this 7th month of 1839 of William Pennington, $9 for a coffin I made for his father, signed by William Larkin. Now, in 1839, these two guys were just doing business. In 2008, these two guys are two of my ancestors. But at that time, they were of no relation. So something as simple as that, checks that everybody says, well, throw them out after 7 years. It's interesting to have these sort of things this long after the fact. And so one last thing that I will mention is Bob has talked about the Historic Creator Program, and that's really what the impetus was today, was to talk about the families of the area and to talk about this wonderful house that's back here. When I was on the Historic Review Board, we had a all-day program, and Kim Burdick was there, Bob was there, and many of our elected officials were there, both state and local, down at Buena Vista. And we had folks from Maryland there, we had folks from Massachusetts and New York that were there to talk about the resident curatorship. And when Bob was talking about pros and cons, he said, well, one of the cons is you got to pay for it, the restorations. Well, one of the pros that came out of that conversation that day was that because you don't own the property, the local government still owns the property. And it has been vetted through their program in Maryland. The contributions, or the money you spend on renovating these properties, is a tax-deductible contribution because it is essentially a donation to the county, to the state. And people in the Maryland program have been audited. The IRS has signed off on it that it is in fact a valid deduction. The other thing that a lot of the folks in Maryland do is it's not like you have to come in and say that you have $500,000 that you're going to spend on repairing this house. A lot of the folks in Maryland, they have a community and they swap. And one guy's a plumber, one guy's a handyman. And you know, if I could fix your windows or fix my plumbing, it costs a lot less. And so there are a lot of ways that could be worked out to make the program work, and it would be a shame to see this structure go the way of so many of our other structures at Brandywine Hundred. We mentioned the house at the corner that Philip and Eva lived in. To my knowledge, it was one of the first to have an elevator in it. Eva, I believe, had some sort of leg problem, and Philip had it installed. And it was a beautiful house. And we were hoping that we would have preserved it. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed with DelDOT, but the barn across the street did get preserved, as well as the Bird husband's house, which is over across the street. And so we have had some successes. We talked about the Grange earlier. The Grange was a huge success, and we were happy that it was preserved and is available. The Peppies will rent it out for use, and it's a beautiful restoration that they have done. Bob, thanks again.
Thank you, James. That James is being modest. That house, the Grange, would not have been saved if it weren't for his personal initiative. Many of us were there when that house got moved early in the morning before the sun rose, but we want to thank James for his initiative in the Stark Review Board for moving the house, and also for the Peppies for saving that house as well. You know, it's important to do oral histories. Sit down with your great uncles, your great aunts, your grandparents, and tape them. I did this 30 years ago with my great uncles and great aunts, and found out that at the time that my family came here in 1892, so we're sort of newcomers. My grandfather's cousin opened up a furniture store on Market Street called Feinberg Furniture Store. And then he contacted my grandfather, who was his cousin, and said, we don't have any good Jewish delicatessens in Delaware. Well, why don't you come down, you can live with me above this shop on Market Street. And my grandfather and my grandmother did that, and they opened up a delicatessen on 7th Street between Market and King, called Reuben's Delicatessen from 1932 to 1954. And then they sold the business to the Gamilles. And of course, some of the younger kids will remember the Gamilles. I do remember my grandparents. I was only 4 years old when they sold Reuben's Delicatessen, but I remember the big pickle barrels and climbing up and getting a pickle as big as my head and eating that, and watching them at the time. It was a great history. So, you know, just make sure that each of us does our part to chronicle our own oral histories. I think it is an incredible testament to the passion and interest in our collective Brandywine Hundred history that all of us stayed here for more than 2 hours. And I hope that I can organize another event again when we can again talk about another chapter in our proud Brandywine history. Our speakers will be here for a short period of time afterwards. Andy Talley, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, I would.
Yes.
When we're talking about family history, I'm trying to update my great-grandfather, Charles Talley, from him on down through my family. And you now keeping good records for all your families to come is extremely important. The Bureau of Vital Statistics is completely unreasonable. They throw roadblock after roadblock if you want to try to find out something in terms you're going to have to prove your ancestry, document it to get information that you want. Because I have 2 members of my grandfather's brother, 2 of his children I'm having difficulty with, but I think I'm going to work it out so I can get completely up to date from my great-grandfather. But it is very important, if you're interested in your genealogy and getting together what you can of the past, keep very good records of now and of the future. Keep them in your family Bible, whatever, because Bureau of Vital Statistics, all because of 911, are going to present a lot of roadblocks to you.
Right. Thank you for that advice, Andy. We're going to urge people to stay, come up, take a look at the maps of Brandywine Hundred from the 1800s and 1900s. See the families, where they lived. You'll see the names you recognize. Speak to our speakers. Please also, you'll get copies of the videos from Ray Bukta from his shop. Ray, tell us where that is again.
202 in Murphy Road.
202 Murphy Road for $5 a copy. Let's give us all around. Oh, yeah, Tom Talley, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think I can speak for everybody, and thank you for putting all this together. One other funny story, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I often get the question, why is Foulk Road Folk Road? And a lot of people get confused about that. I'm named after my great uncle Thomas, who lived behind the fire station in Claymont. He worked so hard to get Folk Road's name changed back to Folk Road because of the presence of the Foulk family. For some reason, an engineer made a mistake, started calling it Foulk on maps. But please honor the Foulk family and call it Folk Road.